With high-speed internet in everyone's pocket, porn is everywhere. But do we really know what it's doing to us? I'm Dr. Rena Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon, and today we're unpacking a topic that seems to have endless debates: pornography. Is it harmful? Is it helpful? Or is, as often the case in science, is the truth somewhere in between? I'm here to break down the facts, dispel some myths, and give you the information you need to make informed choices about your sexual health. In this episode, we're going to take a closer look at what the best available research tells us, both the positive and negative impacts of pornography. Why does this conversation matter? Well, let's be real. Pornography isn't going anywhere. With 5G, high-speed internet in our fingertips, in our phones, in our pockets, adult content is more accessible than ever before. And in the US, about 70% of adults have viewed pornography at some point in the last year or so. But what sets today's conversation apart is we're not just saying porn is good or porn is bad. Instead, what I want to do is help you understand the complex, nuanced reality that science reveals. We'll talk about how pornography can impact people differently depending on their values, their relationship situation, and their consumption patterns. And most importantly, we'll talk about practical ways to develop a healthy relationship with pornography, regardless of if you choose to use it or not. Let's start off with, why do people use pornography? I mean, a lot of people are probably like, yes, this is obvious, but let's talk about the motivations behind pornography use. Some of them are not as obvious as you might think. There's a survey tool that was developed called the Pornography Use Motivation Scale, or PUMS. And it was essentially looking at different reasons people turn to porn. And they used this with over 2,600 participants, and they found 8 main motivations for use. The most obvious, sexual pleasure, which is essentially to enhance arousal or enhance masturbation. Sexual curiosity, to learn new things about sex. Number 3, fantasy, experiencing things that are not always possible in real life. Number 4, boredom avoidance, or passing time when you're bored. Number 5, if you're not sexually satisfied, so compensating for an unsatisfying real-life sex life. Number 6, a little surprising emotional distraction, so as a way to suppress negative emotions. Number 7, stress reduction. And number 8, self-exploration, a way to understand your own body and your own desires. Now, in this study, they found that men generally had higher motivation for things like pleasure, boredom avoidance, and stress reduction, while both genders were similar in terms of levels of sexual curiosity and self-exploration. But the interesting thing was, when we talk about pornography, we often talk about people having issues with pornography, or what researchers call problematic porn use. So this study looked at, were there certain characteristics of motivations that were more likely to have problems? And what they found was that motivations like stress reduction or coping with negative emotions were highly associated with problematic or potentially unhealthy use of pornography. Now, what happens to your brain on pornography? What does the science say? When we view any sort of sexual stimuli, it activates reward pathways. These are the same reward pathways that respond to things like food, social reward, or other sources of pleasure, the ventral striatum and the nucleus accumbens. Brain studies have shown that explicit sexual content generates stronger brain responses, something called late positive potentials, or LPPs. And this reflects how our brains pay attention and become emotionally engaged in something. But here's the interesting part. Individuals' brains react differently based on their own sexual history, their level of curiosity, and their reward sensitivity. For example, what they found is that people who've had more sexual partners seem to respond similarly, whether it's low level of erotic imagery or high level of erotic imagery, whereas others might be more sensitive to novelty. Previously on the podcast, we had Dr. Nicole Prouse. She is a scientific researcher who looks at the impact of pornography and sex on the brain. And what she found was that basically watching pornography does activate those same pleasure centers. However, the intensity of those pleasure centers being activated from pornography is significantly less than what you would get from partnered sex or physical affection. And what people get wrong is that just because your brain's activated, it doesn't automatically mean you're addicted. Yeah, the reward system is involved, but just like you get rewards from eating something delicious, it's not necessarily the same way that people get addicted to drugs or alcohol. Most people tend to not not lose control over their use. But of course, there are some people who do report having problems, and I don't want to ignore them. But we're going to start by talking about the benefits. So let's take a minute to talk about the benefits of pornography, because research has identified some real tangible benefits with the consumption of pornography. They found that people who watch pornography often report more positive attitudes towards sex. They're usually more open, willing to communicate, and comfortable experimenting with their partners. It can be a safe way for them to explore their desires alone and with a partner. In fact, some research shows that watching porn together as a couple increases arousal and sparks conversation. And for women, what they found is that when they see realistic depictions of masturbation, this correlates with more frequent and more satisfying orgasms, likely because it's just normalizing self-pleasure. For those with limited opportunities for sexual activity, either due to health, due to social reasons, or not having a partner, pornography can provide a real outlet for pleasure and stress relief. And masturbation by itself, leading to orgasm with or without porn, has some true benefits. It can improve sleep, it can help with pain relief, stress reduction, and potentially have benefits for pelvic and prostate health. Check out my video on ejaculating this certain number of times for prostate cancer. And we've talked about this study that's been published many times, but there was a study that found that ejaculating 21 times or more a month was correlated with having a lower risk of prostate cancer. And the theory behind this is that we're actually moving fluids from the prostate, which are contributing fluids to semen, and sort of not allowing them to stagnate, which may then help reduce the risk of prostate cancer. Now, this is not a causation, but it does say that certainly doing that 21 or more times is not going to cause you harm in terms of prostate cancer. There was a qualitative study which essentially gathered men together, interviewed them, and then looked at themes from their conversation. And in this study, they recruited men from diverse backgrounds, and they found that when they talked to them about pornography, a lot of them saw porn as normal and unproblematic. It may provide educational benefits and potentially help developing sexual identities and help in learning new sexual techniques. Now, another study was a systematic review of 44 studies on pornography with over 10,000 people. And essentially, they had mixed results. In terms of positive sides, they said that women who used pornography had greater sexual arousal during solo sex. And for men, using pornography to satisfy curiosity was actually linked to higher sexual satisfaction. So again, remember, the motivation was curiosity here. In relationships, when women watched sexually explicit material, they found this was associated with higher desire, satisfaction, and more frequent sexual activity for both partners. So I know a lot of people worry, like if you're using pornography to replace your partner, that's a negative, right? But ultimately we're seeing, at least in the female gender, that those who view pornography tend to actually have more sex with their partners. Now, there's also possible risks that have been seen in research. Some studies have found that people who identify as frequent pornography users find that it takes longer and requires more stimulation to achieve orgasm. And men sometimes find themselves needing to fantasize about porn during sex to stay aroused. Now, the way I tend to explain this is that people can become habituated. If they masturbate the same way every time, or they watch the same type of pornography every time, that may be difficult to replicate in real life. If you're only getting aroused with one thing and you're only ejaculating to one thing, then yes, you may find it difficult. Now, that's not necessarily about the pornography. It can be about just not diversifying your interests enough, right? And so that is an issue. Now, the other thing is that when people self-describe themselves as having issues with pornography, that does find itself to be more correlated with sexual function issues like erectile dysfunction. And again, this is probably due to visualizing pornography and having a certain level of arousal that you have difficulty obtaining when you're not watching pornography. And so this can be mediated by sort of taking a break or using different types of stimulation. And over time, those functions will return. Now, when people are watching pornography by themselves and becoming secretive from their partner, or it's replacing connection with their partner, so they're avoiding being intimate with their partner, can be linked with lower sexual satisfaction. And In relationships, it's often not just the porn, but it's how partners communicate about it. So oftentimes people feel secretive, they feel shame, they're avoiding talking about it. And that ultimately leads to conflict because one person may view watching pornography as something that is bad, and another person may view it as something that is normal. And that then leads to this shame or guilt, which then leads to sort of a vicious cycle. When people use pornography for things like boredom or to deal with negative emotions, they then find pornography makes them feel good and then they feel shame. And so they feel bad again. And then they're looking for, again, something to make them feel good. So it creates this vicious cycle where people are embarrassed by what they're doing. And then they're going back to use more and feeling more embarrassed and feeling worse about themselves. For young kids, we also know that when they're exposed to pornography at young ages, and unfortunately, the average age is now about 10 when kids are seeing pornography, if they don't feel comfortable talking to an adult about it or they don't know what they're seeing, this can create confusion, unrealistic expectation about what sex looks like, what bodies look like, consent, boundaries, and even what healthy relationships look like. I always say that if you're a parent, it is very important for you to talk to your children about pornography. It's not going to be that they're going to see it on your device that you have monitored, but they may see it from a friend's device. They may see it walking in the library. They may see it anywhere. And it's important for them to know what they're seeing, how to respond to it, and how to react to it. Many people are struggling with issues with pornography. However, a lot of it is due to context. Why are people using it? What does it mean for them? And how does it affect their relationship and their personal values? And we'll talk a little bit more about this. But before that, I want to talk about relationships. As I mentioned earlier, couples who watch pornography together tend to report higher relationship and sexual satisfaction. On the other hand, couples who have very different solo porn habits, so one watches a lot, one watches very little, tend to report lower sexual satisfaction. But that's, again, when they're mismatched. When they both use pornography similarly or even frequently, this is not an issue. So they did a large-scale study of couples and looked at how pornography impacted couples in relationships. And the most common response of this was that pornography had no negative effect on their relationship. Many participants even reported positive results. Just like we said, they had improved communication, they were more open, and they had a greater sense of comfort with their own sexuality. But of course, there were some negative effects, like some people had unrealistic expectations. There may have been a little bit of decreased intimacy, maybe some insecurity or trust issues. The bottom line is that pornography can be neutral, can be positive or negative for relationships, depending on the couple and the context. So let's talk about moral incongruence, or essentially when you have a clash between your beliefs and your actions, which is often rooted in religious or cultural values. In a 2019 US study of over 2,000 adults who felt like they were addicted to pornography, found that they were more likely to be male, younger, religious, and view porn use as a moral conflict and use it more often. However, the researchers noted that self-reported pornography addiction is sort of complex. It's not just about how much porn they watch, but also about their personal beliefs and their values. People who were tended to be more religious or believe pornography use is morally wrong were more likely to report feeling addicted, even if they didn't use it that often. Now, ultimately, when you look at the science, it doesn't support the idea that pornography is addictive in the way that substances like drugs or alcohol are. Instead, the feelings of addiction often, again, have this moral incongruence to personal morals, religious upbringing, and sexual behavior, and often have issues like anxiety, depression, or relationship distress. Research shows that people ultimately who see porn as sinful or shameful experience much more emotional distress, even if they're not using it that much. They could be using it once a year and they still might struggle. However, people, of course, do struggle with pornography. And a 2022 study looked at what are the ways that people find that they're losing control when it comes to pornography. And they described 6 components. Number 1 is desire. They often have significantly stronger cravings. Number 2 is conflict. Sometimes they actually don't recognize a conflict between their pornography use and their other goals. Number 3 is control motivation. Volition is the ability to resist the urge to use pornography, and opportunities. Their availability and ease of access to pornography makes it difficult. And lastly, the behavior itself. Now, over time, pornography use can become more automatic and habitual. So it's not necessarily that people are excited to watch the pornography, it's that it becomes a habit, which makes it more difficult to control. And sometimes people with problematic use might have biased thinking and they overestimate the benefits of pornography use and then use that to justify bending their goal of controlling pornography use. I would say that most people can realize when they are using pornography to the detriment of themselves or their relationship. They know that they're using too much. They are not able to go to work. They're not able to spend time with their family or their friends or their partners because they'd rather be watching pornography. And if that's the case, there's a problem. And if you feel like there's a problem, there's a problem. Now, what can you do if you want to have a healthier connection with pornography, if you identify with someone who's having a problem? Number one, be mindful of why you're turning on the pornography. Is it just out of curiosity or for pleasure? Or is it because you want to escape from stress or negative emotions? Once you find the trigger, you can use that trigger to do something else. So if it's escaping for stress or negative emotions, find something else to replace pornography. Watch for the frequency and the context together. So excessive use, if it interferes with your life or your relationship, can be problematic. And of course, if you're finding that it's interfering with your relationship, it's important to discuss it with your partner and identify what the issue really is. And that brings me to the next tip, which is communicate openly with your partner. And this is really hard. I always say this, but no one taught us to talk about sex. So it's important to find out why your partner may or may not feel comfortable with you using pornography and why you feel like it's appropriate, and discuss that as a couple rather than by yourself. Next up is choose your content thoughtfully. So we had Cindy Gallup on the podcast, who is the founder of Make Love Not Porn, where she shows people real life sex on her platform to help people see what real life sex is. Porn is a commercialized product. It is something that people use that is curated, that is edited, that is using very expensive camera equipment and lighting and angles. It is not real life. And a lot of it is unrealistic. And it's fine if you can separate fantasy from reality, particularly when it comes to things like body shape, consent, and what sex typically looks like. And lastly, align your use with your values. If you are really experiencing distress or having an issue because you feel like it's bad for you, it is your sign to get a therapist who understands sexual health. I will link in the description ASECT, which is where you can find a sex therapist near you to discuss these issues to help you work through them. Because a lot of times people online will support abstinence. Now, abstinence can actually be more harmful than beneficial. The reason being is that when someone fails from abstinence, they actually have even more shame, which then pushes them to go back to that coping mechanism, which was pornography in this case. And so it actually makes things worse. So if you can find someone who can help you manage your thoughts around pornography use and identify the triggers, that can help you use pornography in a healthy way. And if that means abstinence for you, that's fine as well. Next up, watch for problematic patterns. Are you feeling out of control? Have you tried to cut back over and over again? Are you using it to cope with emotional distress or letting it get in the way of your responsibilities? This means there's a problem and you need to seek help. So if you are concerned about your pornography use, reach out to a healthcare provider or a sex positive